How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Real Northern Bass. My name's Sean. I am going to recount what happened at the New Hampshire Bass Nation State Team Qualifying Tournament that took place up on Lake Champlain September 12th and 13th out of Apple Island Marine on South Hero in Vermont. It was not a great tournament, but certainly not a bad one, especially for my first ever showing at such a tournament. Now, this is going to be a little bit of me sitting here talking about it, overlaid with a lot of footage from both the 2 practice days and the 2 tournament days. So a little bit different from what you would normally see from me on this, but without further ado, let's dive into it. The most important thing that I wanted to be able to keep in mind when I went into this tournament was learn from my mistakes during the BFL that I fished out of Plattsburgh just about a month prior to this. I spent a lot of time looking for those deep offshore smallmouth, and for the life of me, I couldn't get that bite going. Plenty of others did. I couldn't figure it out to make it work for me. It wasn't until the very last day, the day before the tournament, like Friday afternoon of that BFL, that I figured out a really good shallow water bite. And I took that to the BFL, and I certainly had the bites, but given the conditions where it was blowing about 20 to 25 out of the south, made for some very rough conditions, I had a really hard time feeling any of my fish biting before they ended up taking me and wrapping me around boulders and I'd break off on the hook set. Shame on me for a number of reasons, but not here to talk about that. Here to talk about the lessons I learned from that, how I started that, used that as my starting point out on Champlain for this state team qualifying tournament, the STQT, and tried to maximize my time. So starting with practice, day 1, which there's no footage of, but took it right into day 2, and that's where we'll start the footage from. Knowing that the conditions really hadn't changed as far as water level and water temp went from that BFL 4 weeks prior to where I was now for the STQT, I figured let's start shallow and start on the last things that they were biting the best on at that point. And by shallow, I was focused primarily in 10 to 15 feet of water. I went out there with a couple things first in mind. First thing, and my primary thing, which will come as no surprise to anybody that's fished up there on a regular basis, was a drop shot. And I used a variety of baits, but my number one producer on that was actually that OSP Fuzzy Dice. Can't remember the exact name, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. Very closely followed by a Berkley Max Scent Flat Nose Minnow. Both of those baits did phenomenal for me, not only during my scouting days, but also the 2 days of the tournament, but was not my heavy lifter during practice or day 1. It really came into play on day 2 when conditions got their toughest. But starting out on day 1 and day 2, let's start in that 10, 15, even 20 foot. We'll call it 10 to 20 overall. Fortunately for me, that did hold up. Not only was the drop shot working really well for me, but the Beast Coast Open Water Sniper in MB Sexy Melon, 3/8 ounce, paired with a Green Pumpkin Little General from Berkley, their Max Scent line, or the Beast Coast Fishing's MB Pumpkin, 3/8 ounce, paired with a 2.8 inch Kitech and Perch, that 1-2 punch was phenomenal for me. What was also working exceptionally well that I found out worked really well for me literally in the last half an hour of that BFL was a swing head jig. So I went into these first 2 scouting days with that in mind. That depth range, we'll call it 10 to 20 overall. 1-2 punch of, actually a 1-2-3 punch, drop shot with a couple of different baits, different open water sniper jigs from Beast Coast Fishing, and then that wobble head. I am not kidding. That first spot I rolled up to, any one of those baits, immediate success. And that made things easier because if that did continue to pan out, then that made my approach to scouting a whole heck of a lot easier, because then it was just a matter of looking at the map and going through the lake and trying to figure out, can I replicate that from spot to spot? Then following up by going spot to spot in areas that I'm positive had this same structure and fish my way through it, trying to find balance between catching enough that I understand the quality of fish that's there, 1, 2, that they still want that in those exact conditions, and then 3, like, where do you shut that off enough that, okay, I know they like it. I know the size that I'm going to get into. How many fish are here? Because the way those fish were relating in those particular areas, you almost couldn't see any of them on forward-facing sonar. So a lot of it was they were just buried inside that structure, whether it was a little bit of that sporadic vegetation or if it was individual boulders that just that one rock in general is hanging right on the knuckle at about 15 to 20 feet that dropped off steeper into deeper water. Any of those spots, anything I could find to replicate that, those fish were holding there consistently. I ran from Apple Island Marine north, and pretty much everything that I fished that whole weekend for both scouting and the 2 tournament days was all north of that area. A lot of spots in the Inland Sea and quite a few spots over on the New York side. First day was a half day, went out there with that in mind, worked to a T. Second day was a full day of scouting, went out, ran some of the same spots, just with a slightly different approach, where if I got bit immediately on the wobblehead, I went immediately followed it up with a drop shot instead. I went those spots and just drop shot first. And every single spot, it just worked. You catch 1 or 2 fish. We were in the right quality. A lot of our fish were in the mid to high 3-pound range and a couple of 4-pounders. As soon as we caught 1 or 2 good fish, shut it down, run to the next spot. Repeated that the rest of the day, and literally every spot that I hit, any one of those things was working without question. Day 3, I went a little bit off the beaten path, knowing that I had now a solid 1.5 days of that working, and the conditions were going to stay pretty consistent going into that Saturday, Sunday 2-day tournament, that I went and tried a few different areas where it didn't quite have all of those pieces to the puzzle that had been already working for me for the last 1.5 days, whether I was looking for something that it didn't quite have that depth that then dropped off into steeper water. It was just an expansive area of that depth range that I knew had sporadic boulders scattered around it or just random stalks of vegetation. And then also going to other areas I hadn't fished yet that had that same 10 to 20 riprap rocks, sporadic vegetation, drops off to steep water, and trying different baits. So taking essentially half of what I knew was working and trying to introduce something, unique or just different in general to what worked for the last 1.5 days. And I had some success with that. I got lucky in that my approach was because of a bunch of hard lessons learned and also really good lessons learned from that BFL, and the conditions lining up and being consistent for both water level, water temps, water clarity, the whole 9 yards going into this next tournament. So I'd already eliminated a bunch of question marks just from a month prior, and thankfully everybody was still following that same pattern I had established in the last minute from the previous tournament. So I didn't really have to try and go and work my way through a bunch of different things. So that's scouting in 2.5 days. Now we go on to the tournament. We were met with the first 2.5 days with the same consistent temperatures, high 70s, low 80s, mostly sunny, light wind Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, to dead slick calm Saturday and Sunday. A little bit of wind Sunday, but for the most part, generally calm. I'm still not entirely sure if that's the sole reason why the bite shifted so hard and slowed down so significantly, or the added pressure of the fact that there was also several other tournaments going on the northern half of the lake at the same time, with all that pressure of just additional boat traffic, more lines going in the water in the same areas. Doesn't matter. The only important thing was the number of fish that I saw and was catching dramatically reduced come tournament day. I started the day going out to what I identified as my highest probability of success. I had one of two spots. They were basically 1A and 1B. And I figured 1B was more likely to be not a honey hole, but a community hole. So I figured, okay, high draw number, let's run over there. If there's nobody there, I will consider myself lucky and I'll be able to fish it and go through it and hope for the best. If there's somebody there, then I know that truly my best spot, which is another 20 minutes further run, I have not seen anybody on, so I have a higher chance of being able to go there if I have to later in the day and make it work. For the most part, it worked out. One of the things that I did find worked really well first thing in the morning was just finishing a bladed jig. In this case, it was a 1/2 ounce jackhammer, green pumpkin, with a green pumpkin blade runner from Beast Coast Fishing on the back. I went out there and started throwing that first thing and was immediately rewarded inside the first 5 minutes with 2 3-ish pound largemouth. We had done that just the day before, going in there, throwing something different in an area we'd already caught fish at, and it was an area where it's just generally a lot of vegetation in shallower water that the fish I know preferred to be in early in the morning. So it was just a maybe 2-hour hit and run and then go and work that 10 to 20 foot range. But there's a couple of hard spots scattered throughout that grass, and working inside of those hard spots panned out, but more importantly, working on the outside of them also panned out. That's where I got those fish on those bladed jigs. My co-angler, I flipped into this one rock, missed a fish twice in a row. I let my co-angler end up getting that fish and turned out to be a really good fish. It was about a low 3-pound largemouth and ended up being his biggest fish for the day. So even though I missed it, and I am really technically not obligated to help my co-angler, I'm also not fishing against them, so I want to do my part to ensure they have not only a good day, but a fun day too, and not hate me because I want everybody to succeed. So, I missed it on the second try. I said, can I give it a flip? Yep, by all means, go in there, take a shot. He did not miss on it. So I'm proud of him for being able to get in there and take a shot at that fish and landing it. I had higher hopes for this spot because not only did we get them early morning on the bladed jig, but we'd also been there the day prior to that, like the first full day of scouting. And we got them on both a Texas rig, a Jika rig, and just a regular jig. In this case, a Beast Coast Vanquish, 1/2 ounce stealth craw with a rage craw on the back. And green pumpkin on that. And we fished for another 45 minutes after those first 3 fish, and nothing was going on. All the fish the few that I could see the 2 days prior seemed to have disappeared. Whether they were truly gone or because that high sun had come up, no clouds, no wind, they had just hunkered deep down in the grass and I couldn't quite put it on their nose to get their attention because the vegetation was really thick. Finally decided, you know what? Never mind. Let's go start running the rest of our spots. This is where things got really tricky because every other spot we had fished during scouting continued to pan out, but I had made it a habit in those to only catch 1 to 2 fish and run, assuming that because I caught 1 or 2 fish so fast, I would be able to continue catching more fish if I stuck around. I didn't want to beat up my spots too bad, so we weren't going to overfish it. We continued to move around. That ended up being actually extremely key. Every spot for the next 2 days, I could catch 1 or 2 fish off of it and then it would shut down. But it took me almost half a day on my first day on Saturday to understand that that's what was happening. Rolled up to our second spot and was able to get rewarded with a fish. And then we had to move. And we had to another spot, rewarded with a fish or 2, and had to move. And it was by the third time this happened that I was like, that's the deal. There's enough pressure, whether it's from the other anglers in the area or just the weather in general, that these fish are hungry, they will be fired up, but they're only going to bite for 1 or 2 fish, and then the rest of the school is going to shut off, and they're all going to either scatter or belly down the structure, and they're not going to move until something about the conditions changes that makes them feel comfortable to come back out and start feeding like they were when I first got there. I continued to use a 1-2 punch of throwing a wobblehead, which I was using a 5/8 ounce Strike King wobblehead or swing head with a Strike King Rage Bug and green pumpkin. I was either power dragging it, and by that I mean I was dragging it fast and hard over a long period with short pauses, upwards of maybe 3 seconds, and then repeating. Almost all the fish that I caught the rest of the day I caught just doing that power drag. I caught a few other fish on the drop shot, mostly on that green pumpkin, max scent, flat nose minnow, but I ended up calling all those out with the rest of my fish being on that wobblehead with the Strike King Rage Bug and green pumpkin. Best fish of the day going 4.33 pounds for a smallmouth. And that one, I can kind of say that I scoped, but also not really. I was just panning around. I saw what I was positive was a fish 20 feet from the boat down about 12 feet. I pitched it out, let it fall, and that fish came up, followed it right to the bottom, and slapped it immediately. So very, very little effort on my part other than just scanning around. Oh, look, fish, thunk, slam, and I put that in the boat. Continue to work that, rotating between a series of 4 different spots that every time we pull up on the spot, we'd catch a fish or 2, leave, go to another spot, catch a fish or 2, leave, so on and so on. Every time we came back to that spot, those fish were fired up, we get 1 or 2 more, rinse and repeat. That was all I had to do day 1. Worked out pretty well. For my co-angler, we were able to get him a limit. He was able to execute on his end, and I was able to help him just understand what we were seeing, the areas we were fishing, the spots we were trying to fish, and how we were tackling it. Made the most of it. I think his 3 fish went a little over 9 pounds, so he had a really good day 1. As for myself, I had a little north of 16 pounds, which ended up putting me in 10th place out of 23 boats for day 1. Not where I'd hoped to be, but certainly not out of it. First place had just a hair over 20 pounds. Champlain is fishing so well right now, especially this year, that a 4-pound deficit, while seemingly huge, does not necessarily mean you're completely out of it. So, while I was not entirely thrilled with where I ended up after day 1, I also knew that I had a shot to not only improve, but potentially take a crack at the win. Spoiler alert, didn't win, but we did make an improvement. And with boat draw numbers now flip-flopped, so instead of going out boat 17 out of 23 day 1, now is going out boat 7 out of 23 on day 2. I decided to take a gamble, and we had a decent amount of wind coming out of the south. Not bad, certainly manageable. Was able to run the lake without any issues. It was about the only wind we would have between those 2 days, and it was going to slick off by about 11 a.m. So I took a gamble, and I went to my spot 1A. This spot in particular lines up really well for a southern wind, and I had not seen anybody over there. My one spot that I really wanted to fish was also close to 4 other spots that I knew had fish. I'd already gone through and caught some there before, both in scouting and during the BFL a month ago. So I had a very high degree of confidence that I go to this one spot, be alone, fish it for 3 hours, get a limit like I have every time I've been there, and then run through those next spots, which are all relatively close. And if need be, I can run back over to the Vermont side and go fish the inland sea and, recycle all the spots from the day before. Made the run up there, awful. It was the first time I've ever fished this spot where I did not get a limit. Not only did I not get a limit, I got 2 squeakers. My first fish, actually wasn't even on my first spot. I stopped at a random buoy on a reef and pulled up one little guy that was maybe 1.5 pounds. Then I went to my best spot, what I thought was going to be my best spot, and threw everything that I had at it. And what I was rewarded with was one single 13-inch, less than 1 pound smallmouth on the Beast Coast open water sniper, 3/8 ounce MB pumpkin with that little general on the back. And at that point, it was about 10 o'clock. So I already burned 3 hours, and I knew, okay, these next 4 spots, I'm going to have to work through fast. Spots 2 and 3, not a single fish. And we had caught multiple 4-pounders off them during scouting 2 days prior to this point. So I ran to my 4th spot, which is a spot that I had been told about by a friend. I had fished in the past. I didn't fish it during the tournament. My buddy did. He said he did well. So I was like, you know what? I'm over here. I'm literally driving by. Let's give it a shot. First 2 minutes, rewarded with a decent largemouth on the jig. Okay, we got 3 out of 5 fish. It's not too bad. It's only 11 o'clock at this point. We can make something work. A few minutes after that, I catch another one that I estimated to be about 3.5 pounds. Certainly not a giant, but given I only had 3 fish in the boat and half my day was gone, I needed to make something happen. This was an important fish for me. It got wrapped around a marker, just a random jug that was tied off to the submerged structure in that area. And it frayed off my line enough that when I went to go lift them up, broke off. This is the point of the tournament where I felt like the wheels were about to fall off and I was going to spin out. And Brandon Polnick is an angler I look up to a lot. He says he has a lot of really, really good insight about just how to mentally keep your composure. And there's a tournament he did recently where he said, I almost let the devil win. And that's exactly how I felt in that moment. But I took 5 minutes for myself. I laid down and I just kept reminding myself, you're not out of it. You still have over 3 hours to fish. You still have a bunch of spots that you have plenty of time to fish in those 3 hours, and they produced yesterday. So why are you worrying about this? Plus, you still have spot number 5 that's 2 minutes away that has produced fish literally every time you've been there too as well. So get your crap together and get back to work. That 5 minutes was huge for me, just so I could collect my thoughts and get that positive affirmation cycle going again and get back to it. And I did. Go to spot number 5. Nothing. So spot number 1 and spot number 5, which have been insanely consistent for me, 13-incher. Not good. So I said, okay, at that point, by the time I get over to my spots from day 1, I will have about 2.5 hours left to fish. And it takes me about 5 to 7 minutes to get from one spot to the next, another 5 minutes to get from that spot to the next. So I really have enough time where I can go run to one spot, fish it for 20 minutes, get my 1 or 2 fish, know they're going to shut off, run back to spot 2, do the same thing, run to spot 3, and I can run through all 3 of those spots at least 3 more times and probably still have plenty of time to even hit another one a 4th time before I head back. That proved out to be really well. Whether or not I should have done that from the very beginning, no one can really say. I mean, in hindsight, yes, I can say that was what I should have done from the very beginning. But you can't know those things ahead of time. We can only know that and make those decisions based in hindsight. So I don't regret what I did because I knew of the potential I had over on the New York side. And just unfortunately, it didn't pan out despite the conditions where I felt were ideal to hit those areas with that southern wind. So run back over and start fishing the Vermont side on the inland sea. And go to my first spot, which at this point had started producing almost all of my biggest fish, and immediately get fish number 4. Feeling good, bite dies, give it 20 minutes. Okay, gonna run up, go to the next spot. Get in there, nothing. It's like, okay, I can see them. Maybe someone's just in here a few minutes ago I didn't see. Let's leave, go up to the other spot that I started day 1. Get up in there, start throwing around a spinnerbait because the wind was still playing nicely. Caught my 5th keeper. It was a very sickly looking largemouth, and I was not feeling good about having that live well, but 5, even unhealthy ones, is better than not having 5. So hit my 1 fish, waited 20 minutes, ran back down to the middle spot that I didn't get anything on when I just passed by it 20 minutes prior to this. Started looking around, panning around on live scope, making sure all those fish were still there. See one right on the knuckle, 20 feet, exposed ledge face, going down in deeper water. So I had dedicated myself to a moving bait while the wind was up, but at this point it had completely slicked off. So I said, okay, I'm going to pick up my 2 drop shot rods. And it was the 1-2 punch on the drop shot between that flat nose minnow and the OSP fuzzy dice. Panning around, see what I think is a mark, but could have been vegetation. Throw my drop shot down on it, and it just moves. I'm like, good, that's a fish. Dunk. Ended up being a 4.92 smallie. So my first call was an almost 5-pound smallmouth that got rid of that 13-inch, not even a pound smallmouth. At this point, okay, wheels didn't fall off. We got back on track, and we made a huge call. Let's see if we can keep this going. Get back up, retime my drop shot because it was about a 4-minute fight to land that fish, and I was fishing 8-pound fluoro for my leader. So get back up, pan around, see another fish, the exact same situation. Throw it out, wait 10 seconds, boom, hits it, lean into it, 3 1/4 smallmouth. That called out another fish that was just barely over a pound. So in the span of 2 casts and a total of less than 10 minutes, I called up about 6 pounds. And I was starting to feel like I now didn't have a chance at winning, but if I was struggling to get fish to bite as much as I was during this day, then I had confidence, not like a positive confidence, but like, Jesus, if this is bad for me, it's got to be maybe it's just as bad as for everybody. Like I had that level of confidence that everybody else was probably struggling, or at least the majority of people were struggling. So if I could at least replicate and or slightly improve on what I did day 1, I had a good shot of at least slightly improving my overall standings for day 2. Got those 2 calls, 2 fish, done. 20 minutes, run back to the first spot that I started in this rotation of 3 spots. Called up again. That started to make me feel really good that, okay, I just called up yet another pound. Maybe there's really a good shot that I might be able to get into a couple bigger fish and like have a shot at winning this. But again, spoiler alert, didn't win. That's what it took. At the end of the weekend, it just really the biggest lesson that I can share was truly listening to the fish and the conditions. When the wind was up a little bit during scouting, they wanted things a little faster. Having that wind, that little bit of chop, breaking up the light, still mostly sunny conditions. So really the only thing that changed was the wind and less boat traffic. They were more aggressive. They were willing to go after that bigger meal. They were willing to be more opportunistic in how they're feeding. And as the pressure climbed from anglers and the weather a little bit, we really need to slow things down because the fish are slowing down. Keeping that in mind and listening to the fish, listening to the conditions, listening to the lake, and following my gut with this ended up proving to be pretty well. At the end of the day, I ended up having about 16.7 pounds for day 2, giving me a little over 32 pounds total for my 2 days. So across 10 fish, a 3.2 pound average, not terrible. Never get you a paycheck up on Champlain, more often than not. Like vast majority of times, not going to get you a paycheck. But in this case, it was good enough to move me up from 10th to 7th place overall. And thankfully, it qualified me for the Bass Nation Regional. I'm just not entirely sure where because they haven't announced it yet as of the date of this video. But yeah, it was good enough to qualify me for the Regional. So my first ever time making or even taking an attempt at the state team qualifying tournament, I was able to qualify for the Regional, which was ultimately the goal, with like a really, really high level goal of finishing 1st or 2nd to qualify straight to the 2025 National Championship. I'm just happy that I went in there, didn't lose myself, had fun in the end, found a pattern that I was able to execute pretty well. I only lost 1 fish both days. First day I just had probably a 3.5 pound smallmouth jump off, which would have moved me up at least 1 spot. Day 2, having that 3.5-ish pound largemouth break off right at the boat. Those 2 together may have moved me up as high as 5th, but definitely no higher than that. That's based off guesstimation, and really at the end of the day, it doesn't count. What does matter is where I did finish. All in all, I'm happy. I do want to thank New Hampshire Bass Nation for a very well-run tournament. It went as smoothly as I could possibly hope for. And everybody that was up there that was willing to talk to me and say hi, a lot of these gentlemen, I know them by name, but I've rarely had the opportunity to even speak to any of them. And for the most part, almost all of them were extremely friendly. And I really appreciate that they were willing to be friendly with me. Who was primarily not known as a tournament guy, but as a YouTube angler, for lack of a better way to put it, which I know kind of, well, doesn't matter. They were awesome. I feel like I made a couple of not necessarily friends, but strong acquaintances out of it. And that's really what this should be all about, is that camaraderie. And it's something that I truly appreciated when I was younger, doing freestyle BMX, traveling all over New England for that, and desperately missed. And starting to find that a little bit more here in the tournament scene here in New England. So it makes me feel good that I was able to come away with that with nothing but positives. And most importantly, qualifying for that regional in 2025. So hopefully you were able to learn a little bit of something from this. It was a lot of good lessons learned, just understanding what went wrong the last time and paying attention to the conditions on that lake, like leading up to this tournament, and just being cognizant of what changed and what didn't. In this case, essentially nothing did. So that worked in those conditions, and this is essentially the same conditions. So that should be your starting point. You want to go into it trying to eliminate as many variables as possible to hone in on that pattern as quickly as possible. And in my case, I know that's something I tend to do better at than most people, where I can find a pattern versus relying on specific spots and specifically going after bait fish chasers. Like that will undoubtedly be, it's like high risk, high reward. And if you make it work consistently, then hats off to you, because one, that's insanely hard, and two, it's incredibly hard to count on. But three, if you do make it work and it does pan out for you, usually your weights are going to reflect the effort, and it's usually a really good weight. So I will say hats off to Dan Tavilla as well for winning it and qualifying for the 2025 National Championship, and also my friend Tanner Graves, who came in second. He also qualified for the 2025 National Championship. This guy's had a hell of a tournament. I know Dan had over 40 pounds total for the 2 days. I believe Tanner did as well, just a hair over 40 or just a hair under. 2 really solid days of tournament fishing from both of those guys, so congrats to them. I am looking forward to the regional next year. We'll see how it goes. I have no idea where it's going to be. I just hope it's not the Potomac, because I know nothing about tidal fisheries. I do want to take a quick second to thank my sponsors, because they literally made this happen for me, being able to support me, not only with the gear, but also the money to be able to go up and do this. So first and foremost, Ben's Tackle Shack in Leicester, Mass, because Dan and Ben down there have been phenomenal supports for me since day one. They're online, benstackleshack.com. All these you can find down in the video description below. Beast Coast Fishing, specifically Derek, the owner out of Connecticut, he's been a huge supporter of me since day one. He makes some of the best damn jigs out of the market. I've caught a metric ton of fish on it. We've made some good money on those. Not this round for making money. There was no money made anyway, but still put a couple of fish in the boat. Helped out anyway. Appreciate you, Derek. FXR Pro Fish. There is literally nothing else I wear for gear out in the water. I cannot say enough good things about these guys. They are phenomenal. Whether it's their summer gear with these UPF long sleeves, or it's their rain gear, their insulated winter gear for if you're ice fishing, or if you're not like me, stays out in their boat all winter long. Cannot say enough good things about them. Been with them for 4 years, and I hope to stay with them for a long time. If you're interested, DM us. I can send you an insane discount code that you can use on any order for any of the FXR, Pro Fish, or Lifestyle gear. I promise you the discount code that we are allowed to share with you is going to be better than anything any pro staff guy gets. And I'm not saying that to trash talk. I'm just saying that to make a point of how good it is. Oliver and I, Big Bass Dreams, Defiant Fishing, both of those, they're just insanely supportive of what we do. Their line has been my go-to since I even before I signed with them. Tried it out on a whim, beyond pleased with it, have not been let down by their line whatsoever, whether it's their heavy cover or soft casting fluoro or that smooth casting braid. Like, all of it's just phenomenal. And then, of course, Big Bass Dreams for making phenomenal gear and just being owned by one of the coolest dudes on the planet, Oliver. Wicked supportive guy. Consider him a friend. Very, very, very helpful. And just always speaking positive, trying to uplift me. So thank you very much for that. Douglas rods, which were heavily used during this tournament. And honestly, that 766 XF, totally overkill for what I was doing with that wobblehead. But I tell you, swinging on that with straight 18-pound heavy cover Defiant fluorocarbon with a 5/8 ounce weight, about one of the most fun bites you can do. Just cracking big smallmouth on it. Tons of fun. Waterland Optics. I love their sunglasses. Been them for 3 years. Zero complaints. They're great. Use code ReelNorthern for 15% off on any of your orders. Lou's Fishing for continuing to keep us on for all of our reel needs and summer rods. They've been phenomenal. Been with them for 5 years. Can't say enough good things about those guys. Happy to answer any questions on both Douglas and Lou's for both rods and reels. Any questions, anytime, let me know. And last but not least, Crazy Hick Bait Company, New Hampshire-based company, makes a bunch of soft plastics. Jason over there has been hugely supportive of what we do and very helpful for me, so I greatly appreciate what he does for me as well. And if you're interested, go over to their website, check out all the baits they have. You will not be disappointed. Thank you all for watching. Greatly appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if you had any questions about something I didn't cover, anything that you took to heart for something that I talked about, for hopefully a good lesson learned for you. Take that in your next tournament. Wish you nothing but the best. Sorry this is a long video, but I figured this is better to do it in just one long shot and let you chip away at it, throughout your own time versus spreading out into 3 or 4 videos, because who wants to watch that many different ones? So thank you all. Greatly appreciate your support. Leave a like before you go. Leave a comment. Share the video, please. We greatly appreciate that. Otherwise, catch you guys in the next one.